Stephanie Hodges is a public health professional and an entrepreneur who wants to serve the constituents of District 3, the newly created Charleston City Council District 3 seat on City Council. I talked one-on-one with Stephanie about the issues on Johns Island for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Stephanie Hodges, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, you are a public health professional and actually you own and operate a public health and nutrition policy consulting business. Now you want to become the next councilwoman for the City of Charleston's new council seat, which is District 3, which covers basically Johns Island. Let me ask you right now, what exactly, Stephanie, qualifies you to become the next councilwoman for this district?
Thank you for that question, Quintin. So as you mentioned, I am a public health professional and I own and operate my own public health and nutrition policy consulting business, where in this day-to-day work, I actually work with members of Congress and their staff, as well as other policy and decision makers to find policy solutions to pressing issues. And I look forward to bringing that skill to City Council. I would also say, I recognize firsthand the issues that are facing individuals, families, and businesses in District 3, like traffic, flooding, and development. We're really lacking a vision and a long-term comprehensive and strategic plan for our district. And as a leader and a policy-oriented professional, I really look forward to working with stakeholders across District 3 to find practical solutions through policy to improve the quality of life for those living in our area.
And I want to get back to that in just a second, but obviously, as I mentioned, you are a candidate for the City of Charleston Council, Charleston City Council's District 3 area. What ways right now are you actually engaging with the constituents?
That's a great question. And I'll give you a couple of examples of projects I've been working on for the last couple of years. But predating that, I was actually a community organizer and advocate for our area, really working to bring attention to some of the issues, as well as bringing in candidates and other potential elected officials to just raise awareness of our community and what we need. But since June, I've actually been working with our state and county officials to get a double line painted in front of my neighborhood. We've had multiple traffic fatalities, and luckily we now have a work order number, but that shouldn't take 4 or 5 months when we have people dying on our roads. Another example is we have a community that is experiencing a difficulty in terms of a potential bridge and a potential development coming right behind their neighborhood. I've been working with them to figure out what levers might stop this from happening because the infrastructure is not there, and that's something that we see across Johns Island. I've been able to connect with folks through my door knocking experiences. I've had coffee with folks. I've set up calls, and it's really been an eye-opening and really incredible experience to hear directly from these potential constituents and me be able to say, okay, what do we need to do to solve these problems? And that's really something that I love doing, is finding those solutions and being able to connect that back to these communities.
Going back to obviously what you mentioned about that traffic fatality in your district, how many traffic fatalities that is in your district currently?
That's a great question. I do know that Johns Island and Wadmalaw Island have 2 of the highest rates of traffic fatalities in the Charleston area. I met with our fire chief for St. John's and the City of Charleston just a couple of weeks ago. They've had to increase the purchasing of equipment for extractions for these serious fatal car accidents and near fatal car accidents. So our roads aren't safe, and there are a lot of county and state road improvement projects happening. And I want to be the voice on City Council that makes sure we are putting safety at the forefront of any of these updated projects.
So how many infrastructure projects do you have currently in your district?
Yeah, so there's a lot of road improvement projects that are either proposed or are currently looking at being proposed and currently under development. A couple of those, obviously, there was a big announcement earlier this week in terms of funding for 526 extension. The Main and 17 flyover is another one. The pitchforks, the northern and southern pitchforks on River Road. But all of those, while they're so important in terms of moving traffic around the island and making sure people can safely and quickly get on and off, we have to think of our traffic improvements really as being twofold. We have to focus on safety, but also encouraging as less traffic on our roads as possible. And these plans really do have to be inclusive of all forms of transportation, including walking, biking, and public transportation. I would also add, we have these kind of 3, I would say, major highlighted projects, but there are other improvements we can do too. There are proposed roundabouts at several different really important intersections, moving entrances and exits off of Maybank Highway so that traffic can continue continue to flow. Putting in turn lanes, a lot of times down Maybank, we don't have those, and so traffic backs up. It's not safe. People are trying to cross. So I think there are other projects as well that we can be looking at and designing and proposing that don't have to do with these really three key big ones, but really focusing on alternative transportation means is something that I'm really passionate about taking to City Council as well.
So, for instance, roundabouts, how much of that would that cost your district taxpayers?
That's a great question. So because they're not been through the full process yet, we don't have the budgetary numbers, but that is something that I would work with county and state officials to get those. And I do want to be very clear, taxes are something that people, are really interested in. I do not plan to raise taxes on folks. I would rarely, if ever, vote for a tax increase. But at the same time, as you recognize, and I recognize in folks in the district, we have to make improvements to our roads. We have to make improvements to our infrastructures, and that is coming from taxpayer dollars. But what I would really look at is what funding mechanisms do we have, not only locally, but also federally, right? So some of the 526 money going after federal dollars there, working with Army Corps of Engineers through flooding and federal dollars there. So there are different funding mechanisms and avenues that I would look to in addition to what we have locally at the city and county levels.
And just, I want to make the viewers clear that it takes Charleston City Council to make a decision on changing taxes and, obviously that. So just want to make that clear. But going back, obviously, to 526, the cost of 526 extension over Johns Island now is $2.35 billion. SCDOT Chairman, the Secretary, Christy Hall, says the previous extension of the estimate of that is outdated, and a lot of things contribute to the new price tag for the project. What is the current market conditions of construction in your district?
That's a great question. I don't know the exact answer to that, but what I do know is the cost of these improvements keep rising. And so we have to really be, when these estimates are given to us, that's why it's so important to have an advocate to say, hey, we've got to get on this. We've got to get it to permitting. We've got to get it through design quickly. We've got to, get it out to bid so that we can move on the estimates and numbers that we have. I mean, same with housing, right? Housing is, exponentially increased in terms of pricing. And, 10 years ago, it was a totally different market. So that's why we need someone to quickly move on these proposed projects, get them through the process so that the prices, like we've seen with 526, don't continue to go up and up and up. And then us be able to say, we actually don't have the funds to do this for huge projects like this.
Well, let me ask you this, Dan. What are the real estate costs for the alignment of this 526 project?
So I don't know the exact real estate costs for the 526 project in terms of alignment, like you're asking. But what I do know is in August of 2023, for the 29455 zip code, the average cost of a home was $647,000. So while we're talking about real estate, I do want to focus on the attainability and the affordability of that in our area. And we have folks who grew up on Johns Island, and they can't afford to live here anymore. They're having to move away to other areas because it's simply become unaffordable. Well,
yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Stephanie. Well, how many of those residents have actually moved out of the area?
I don't know that we have those estimates. Just being able to track that might be challenging, but anecdotally, I've had those people tell me, we can't afford to live on Johns Island anymore. So the city has done some investments in terms of affordable housing, and I would be an advocate for that on City Council to see what else we can do specifically in District 3.
And I want to get back to that in just a second, but let me get back to 526. What inflation costs do you anticipate right now with this particular project?
I don't have the answer for that. And I don't know that other engineers and estimators on the project have that either, but that's something I'm happy to circle back with our county and state officials and get that exact number for you.
What preliminary work, Stephanie, do you anticipate before this project is actually shovel ready?
Yeah, that's a great question. And something I've been talking to our county and state officials about. I mean, a lot of it is the real estate part, right? So we're having to buy up land, we're having to acquire properties. That is still ongoing, so I don't know exactly how much more we have to do, but that's something I'm happy to look into and see how much longer we expect that to take. But these projects are huge, right? I mean, now we know it's $1 billion project. How are we going to be able to move forward with doing this? I think as a city council member, the role really is making sure that the county and the state officials that are moving this forward have the support that they need and have the advocate to continue to push it forward. But talking about being shovel ready, that is the point where you can actually then go after the federal dollars. So as you mentioned, it has to be shovel ready for us to even be able to go after those federal resources. And so on city council, that's something, I would be an advocate for. Let's continue to move forward with our county and state officials. Let's get this to the shovel ready part and be able to go after those federal dollars, because as you mentioned, inflation, other costs keep going up, and we have to act now because people are tired of sitting in traffic. They're tired of hearing excuses of, hey, it's going to take longer. Oh, we ran into this hurdle. Oh, there's an issue with permitting or process or design. People don't want to hear that. What they do want to hear is, this is going to happen in 7.5. This is going to happen in 10 years, whatever the estimate is. And they want to be making sure that those promises are, going to happen. And they need somebody to go to and be able to share, the process on those things and where the projects currently stand. And that is my role on city council.
Well, let me ask you this. How many cars are there currently on your district, in your district, that is Johns Island?
I don't know specific numbers of cars, but Johns Island, we have about 22,000 residents, and that's based off of the 2020 census numbers. We've seen that exponential growth, and with that usually comes cars, right? And if we're talking about one family, there's a lot of two-car families. And one of the proposed solutions to that is, how can we get cars off of the road, right? We don't have CARTA. I know our county council person is working really hard to bring that to the area. Another thing that I really think we need to explore are public-private partnerships with prominent employers in the area. If we have single car drivers getting in their car, leaving Johns Island, all going to downtown, what can we do in terms of partnerships with employers to say, okay, we're going to sponsor a bus, we're going to work together, and we're going to get 50 to 75 cars off the road with one bus and do that multiple times a day. I think there are just so many opportunities that we haven't really capitalized on. There was actually a 2018 Council of Governments report. It included 2 municipal park and rides in those recommendations for Johns Island. How many do we have? 0. So where do those recommendations go? That is something that someone on city council can work with county and state officials to say, hey, look, we had this recommendations for 2 park and rides. The city has some real estate acquisitions in the works in terms of purchasing land on Johns Island. Is there an opportunity for the city council person to say, hey, we're buying up these 2 acres. What can we do in terms of putting that park and ride finally there? So we have to think strategically, and we can't just say, we're going to do 526 and nothing else, or we're going to do these road improvements or nothing else. We can do more things, at once. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think it really does focus on putting a lot of these recommendations, through the processes that they need to go to address our traffic. So that's something I'm really passionate about, is acting on a lot of these recommendations, but also studying our traffic and having that strategic plan. We don't have that for the area. We don't have that for District 3. And we can't really, kind of do, and I talked about this in our candidate forum the other night, these onesie-twosie improvements without thinking big picture and strategically of how does that look long term. And that's something that I would really be passionate about.
Well, I know MUSC and ROPA are obviously partners with Carter to make sure their employees get from where they live to obviously to their place of employment. Plus, you also have Mike Seekings as the Carter chairman, so we'll talk to him more about that soon. But going back to 526, how many bids for this project will be ideal to actually drive the prices lower for this 526 project?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the first part of the question? I didn't hear that.
Yeah, no worries. How many bids for this particular project would actually drive the price for it down?
I'm not sure. That's something I'm happy to check in with our county and our state officials about. It's a big project, right? So I think that is, probably going to limit the amount of bids, because a company has to obviously have the capacity, the resources, or be able to contract with that. So I don't know exactly how many bids they're looking at getting, or how many, would help in terms of making sure that is an affordable estimate and project, but something I'm happy to talk with our county and state officials about.
And going back, obviously, to the obviously growth, that is, what has been the growth rate in your district over the past 4 years?
So past 4 years, I'm not sure, but we did see exponential growth from the 2010 census to the 2020 census. We saw also a shift in demographics, right? So we saw different folks leaving the area, different folks moving in. The average age has changed, and just the average demographic. And so I think with that, we have a lot of, kind of soul searching to do of what is our community going to look like in the future? And also, how do we make sure that a lot of our culture that Johns Island and District 3 was built on carries through? I think really bringing the voices to the forefront of the communities and the folks that have lived in this area for 20, 30, 40, 50 years is so important for us to look at long-term strategic planning. We have to know what the area went through. We have to know, what plans were made, what improvements were, brought to the forefront to be able to move us in a direction of true long-term comprehensive planning. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to doing.
What is the historical population trend for District 3?
Yeah, so I actually have some numbers in front of me, and I don't want to misspeak, so I'm just going to look at them briefly. But from 2010 to 2018, we actually saw Black households decline by 31% on Johns Island, and white households increased by 64%. So, right there just goes to show the demographic shift that I was talking about, in making sure that, folks who want to call Johns Island home are able to, and we can do that through attainable and affordable housing initiatives.
So how much land is there available for affordable housing and attainable housing in District 3?
So that's something that I would have to check in with the city about, as well as county and state officials. What I do know is we continue to see apartment complexes go up, and we continue to see housing developments go up. Even in my neighborhood, there was a development nearby. It said starting at $400,000. This was right before the pandemic. They came back and put a sticker over that sign, and then it was starting at $550s, right? So we saw such a significant shift in housing prices in a matter of less than a year.
Wow.
We've continued to see that happen on the island. What I do also want to recognize is, we have teachers, we have firefighters, we have our hospitality workers, that Johns Island has really grown, right? We have tons of restaurants now. We're going to have a new school in a couple of years. Why are those people having to live further out? And why can't they, live, when we talk about traffic, right? Wouldn't it be great that you have an 8-minute commute instead of a 38-minute commute? So we have to think, when we're bringing those sorts of things to District 3, how can we make sure that people who are working in the area can also live in the area?
Sure.
And they're not having these awful commutes, and so that their kids can go to school right down the street. So
yes,
it's really all comprehensive. And
gotcha.
That's something that we haven't seen yet for this area. It's all been kind of one-off projects, or approve this development, and some permits for developments go back to 2004 and 2005 that were approved, and we're just now seeing those be developed. And so, I'm very honest when I talk to voters and potential constituents that, we're still going to be seeing development.
Yes, ma'am. And I want, and sorry to cut you off because I'm really running out of time, Stephanie, but I want to go back to those apartments. How many high density apartments do you have currently in District 3?
So high density, I'm not sure. I can double check. But what I do know is we have at least 2, if not more, high density apartments that are coming up. Leasing has just started on one of them. If you're familiar with the ones that caught fire on Maybank Highway. Right. So they're just now starting to lease for those. They're completely unaffordable. They're, studio and 1-bedroom homes. And so how can we work with people who want to come into District 3 in our area to say, okay, what can we do in terms of resources and assistance to work together to make sure that those are at the forefront of all of these projects, while also recognizing, people are coming in and they're using permits from years ago, and that wasn't necessarily something that was in their plans, and no one probably envisioned that we would be at a point where houses are selling for almost $650,000 in this area. But it's happening, it's real, and we have to address it, and we have to come up with policy solutions for that.
So how many homes in District 3 that is, have been actually built at a fairly consistent rate?
So it's a great question. I do know that right now St. John's Water has a request for 6,000 additional water taps. So when we're thinking about how many homes that we can potentially see continue to be developed, that is the number for additional water taps that we see. It doesn't necessarily have to be homes. It could be a mix of homes, apartments, townhomes. And when I say homes, I mean single family. So right. we do know that that is going to continue to be something that District 3 faces, its development, which is why it's so important for us to focus on our infrastructure, meaning our roads, meaning our stormwater. The city right now is going through a comprehensive water plan and zoning ordinance changes. That could really change how we see future growth and development on the island, and it's something that I look forward to being a part of on City Council.
They have the water plan, obviously, and the comprehensive plan, but where's the city's stormwater plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And where is the stormwater plan specifically for certain districts, for Johns Island, for James Island? These are all things that, we need to really be thinking about. And the other thing I want to say about plans, because this got brought up at a candidate forum, and I couldn't agree more. When we have these plans and they're done with such well-intentioned, they're paid for with taxpayer resources and taxpayer dollars, we have to act on them. It's a waste of taxpayer resources if we're putting together plans. For example, we have a 2011 Johns Island Greenways plan. It is just sat on the city website. It, probably needs to be updated because Johns Island looks very different now than it did in 2011. But we have to act on these plans. We can't just continue to, let's do a plan on this, let's do a plan on that, and not follow through with the recommendations. So we have to go into these plans and these comprehensive strategies and long-term visions with, how are we going to execute? How are we going to follow through and implement? Gotcha. And that's something that I'm really passionate about doing because, we don't want to waste taxpayer resources to do more plans and to, think about strategies and all of that without actually executing on it. And I think that's really important.
Well, how much has the taxpayers in District 3 had to pay on the previous plans?
Well, I don't know the exact numbers of how much those plans cost, but any waste of taxpayer resources is too much. So something that really passionate about making sure that anything that we're doing comes to fruition is something that is going to be usable and executed, and being able to make sure that those are put into place.
How many apartments do you have on Johns Island versus homes?
It's a great question. I can check into that.
Okay. How many subsidized, where exactly is subsidized housing for those people who can't afford that type of housing, the new housing on Johns Island?
Yeah, so we do have some communities. For instance, we have a Habitat community, at least one on the island. We do have others, but we have to make sure that not only do those people have a place to live, but they also have a way to get around the island. So as I talked about, we don't have infrastructure for alternative transportation. Not everyone has the availability to get in their car and go to the grocery store. We have a housing complex right across from Food Lion on River Road, and there is no way for those families, and I see it all the time, they have to bike and walk over to get their groceries. They don't have the ability to safely do that. There's no sidewalks connecting. And one of the city requirements is in new developments and in new areas, and we're seeing this on Johns Island, they have to have sidewalks in front of them. I call them sidewalks to nowhere, right? Because they don't connect to other sidewalks. And so what can we do, and what can I do on City Council to make sure that that's a really well-intended policy, right? Okay, let's implement sidewalks. Let's make sure sidewalks are included in these plans. But if they don't connect to others, then they're kind of pointless. And so, with this River Road resurfacing, what can we do? Can we include sidewalks in that plan? I don't know if the answer is yes or no. The ship might have already sailed for that, but really thinking about how can we get people around the islands who don't have access to transportation. And I think that that's really important, that everyone in District 3 have the accessibility to be able to get to a doctor's appointment, to be able to get to a grocery store, to get to our libraries, and to get to our schools. And that's something I'm going to work really hard on.
What is the average cost of a sidewalk?
I don't know. I can check. And I think it depends on the length. So, if we're talking standard sidewalk, I don't know exactly what that is. But, that's obviously questions we have to ask when we're putting forth these proposals, and looking to see, how much does a business have to put into that versus the city versus the state and the county. So there's all these funding sources and streams that we have to be really clear on responsibility, but really thinking strategically about what the impact would be and how important it is for people to be able to have access to be able to get around our islands safely. Because right now that's, people biking and walking up River Road and Maidbank, it's not safe. And we see it every day, close calls, and it's just, it's something that it's unacceptable. And that's not something that I'm going to continue to let happen when I'm on City Council.
I know you talk about funding streams, and the City of Charleston's budget is over $1 billion. Have you actually managed that type of budget before?
So I just want to be very clear. I don't think it's up to any one city council member to manage the entire city budget, right? That's why we have city employees and government officials. What I have done is in my previous experience, I wrote and implemented federal grants to the tune of about $14 million. Those were all coming from the United States Department of Agriculture. I'm really focused on health and nutrition, but writing those grants, identifying those funding streams and implemented is something that I've done in my professional life. But I also would rely on and look to other city officials and city government employees to make sure that we are going after those federal resources as well as state resources. I think it's so important that we work with our state and our county officials that whenever they're going after additional resources, that we lend our support to those, because for someone who's written federal grants, to have people at the local level and state level say, we're very much in support of this project. This is what we're going to do to make sure it comes to fruition and it's implemented well. So I'm very familiar with those processes and would absolutely bring that skill to City Council.
What line item would you put in the budget for capital projects for District 3?
So I think I would need to look at the budget and see exactly where those could be. I don't know that it's necessarily one line item. I think it could go throughout, but something that I'm willing to check into, and also work with my other city council members to identify those. You know, part of this campaign, I've been able to reach out to not only other city council members to understand what is going on and, you know, kind of the processes to make sure that, you know, on day one, I'm ready to hit the ground running, but also reaching out to city employees and just ask questions, planning commission, following meetings, following hearings, to really understand the processes. Because what I don't want to happen is someone to get into City Council for District 3 and have to do all of that back legwork. Like, I've already been doing that to make sure that on day one, I'm ready to go.
But you all only just vote. I'm just going to make it clear for the voters.
Yes. I'm only one vote, as you said. But I think as part of that, I've been making these relationships, right? I've been connecting these dots. I've been asking these questions. And I've been building support and respect from other city council members. You know, a lot of the seats are up for election this cycle, but some aren't. And so making people on city council and city officials know, you know, this is really important, this district. And everyone's really excited about District 3. It's a new district. You know, they're looking for those recommendations. They're looking for someone to tell them where our gaps are, what are our needs, and they've been really receptive so far. And so I think that's what makes me really excited about being able to represent this area.
Have you been able to look at the budget recently?
I haven't looked at the budget recently, but I have been following a lot of the meetings, including the Planning Commission meeting that was today's Friday. So it was this week regarding a lot of different avenues, but specific to our area, the hospital that's coming in on Maybank Highway. And so as we've talked about this whole interview, there's a lot of exciting projects, and we need that advocate on City Council for District 3 and for Johns Island to be able to not only move us forward in the short term, but also in the long term, and think about that bold vision for us and that long-term strategic comprehensive plan.
When the hospital is actually built, Stephanie, how many jobs will that provide for people in that district?
So there are numbers on that. I don't have them right in front of me, but there are economic impacts as well as how many folks it would employ. So happy to follow up with you on that. But what I also do know is the hospital CEO has spoken out about their current employees that live on Johns Island, and they're driving to North Charleston, they're driving to Somerville. So how great would it be for them to be able to stay on their own island and work, you know, really close to home? So there's a lot of excitement around those folks being able to come and be able to work really close to where they live. And as we mentioned, you know, that helps with traffic, right? Because people aren't trying to really get on and off the island. They're able to kind of stay and work where they live, which is great.
I want to talk to you about apartments again, because I wanted to know this. I'm about to call you Councilwoman. I'm sorry.
Well, hopefully.
I can't get involved with that, but but I'm happy to provide a platform for you. But let me ask you, how many apartments do you need right now to drive the housing costs down in District 3?
I don't know. And I don't know that we have those estimates, but happy to look into that and figure out exactly what that is. And it might not be apartments, right? It might be other mixed use developments. I think that that's something that we're starting to see really be of interest to folks. And I think that it really does help also, you know, with traffic and things like that. You know, if we have mixed use developments where we have places that people can walk to right near their homes, or bike to, then, you're getting cars off the road. And so, how can we look at any potential proposed developments and make sure that it really is meeting the needs of our district? Just having, as I said, kind of piecemeal plans and piecemeal ideas isn't going to cut it anymore. And I feel like that's really what's been happening.
What's more important for your district, Stephanie? Is it building new homes and commercial space, or rehabbing, expanding, and better utilizing those existing homes?
I don't know that one is better than the other. I do think what's really important is making sure that our infrastructure can support whatever those needs are. And right now, that's not the case. We've talked about roads, we've talked about stormwater. So, if it is making sure that any homes that are already approved, so I want to be very clear, right? There are permits already for homes that are approved to be built. How can we make sure that those really do fit the needs of our community, if it's not too late for what's already approved?
So how many homes in District 3 have actually been approved thus far?
That's a great question. I don't know, but I can check. But I do know we have 6,000 additional water tap requests.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that earlier. Yes, ma'am. How has the city developed and adopted and actually implemented a drainage master plan that actually could be in coordination with adjacent jurisdictions such as North Charleston, Ravenel, Kiowa Island?
Yeah, well, I think we have to go back and we have to look and see where are the gaps. And also, I think the perception in terms of drainage is that Johns Island and a lot of District 3 is we don't have the flooding issues that downtown and the peninsula has. And that's completely untrue. We have flooding just as much. We have a community on Johns Island that the city is having to put millions of dollars of resources into because it wasn't developed properly. And so looking at making sure any of those new developments that are happening, the current permits that are approved, that they really do take into consideration drainage and then also impacts on flooding. But looking at our zoning changes that are happening, this comprehensive water plan, talking to our utilities companies to make sure that they're able to feel really confident that we're not going to be having to, come into communities 20 years down the road and put these sorts of resources into them because they weren't designed and developed properly in the first place.
Wow. So how many permits have been actually approved by the City of Charleston?
For District 3?
Yes, ma'am.
I would have to go back and look exactly into that. And I also think, we have to think about how many have been approved, but then how many do we also have that are being proposed to be approved? Sure. But having to look into that, because I know that would be really important for our constituents to really get a grasp on, what we might be looking at from a long-term perspective.
Where exactly has, obviously, property taxes provided a significant revenue for your district?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things happening in our district that, in terms of taxes, and I don't know exactly the tax revenue funding stream, if it's coming from property taxes or not, but we have a lot of great things happening on Johns Island. The city is purchasing 2 additional acres to hopefully connect to a city park, not city related, but we have this parks referendum coming up on the ballot this year that I'm very supportive of because it includes funding for a Johns Island recreation center and aquatic facility. While a lot of the neighborhoods on Johns Island have swimming pools, a lot don't. And we're surrounded by water. So how great would it be to have this aquatic facility to be able to have swimming lessons for our kids? The fact that we have kids on our island that's surrounded by water that don't know how to swim, it's a safety issue. And so I'm very supportive of anything that we can do to make our communities safer, healthier, more accessible. And I think that those are a couple of examples of things that, we can kind of look forward to in terms of tax revenue, not only from the city, but also from other funding streams.
So how much tax revenue would this aquatic center bring to your district?
To the what would?
To the aquatic center.
Oh, the aquatic center. So
How much would that aquatic center bring as far as revenue to the district?
Yeah, I don't know that we have those exact estimates yet, and maybe that's because the Parks referendum hasn't passed yet.
Right.
As we know, the total Parks referendum is $70 million, and that is something the voters are going to have to decide, in terms of voting for that or not. So I don't know. I don't know that we have the exact number for the cost of that aquatic facility and recreation center, or if we know exactly what the revenue would be, but know that it's really important for our constituents to be able to bring a resource like that to our area.
And I want to talk to you about that in just a second, but let me ask you, how many affordable units have developers built in your district, District 3?
So I'd have to go back and look at the exact numbers, but I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, no, no worries at all. Let me go back to the park referendum, as you just mentioned. It's a $70 million park bond referendum that will actually be on the ballot in November, along with yourself, of course. And that is in order to construct new Charleston City of Charleston parks, that is. So what would be the tax implications of voting yes versus no on this?
Yeah, so it is going to come from taxpayer dollars, and they're going to vote on that sales tax. So I actually need to go back and look exactly at what the dollar amount would be. But that's one of the things, right? We're letting voters select whether or not that they want to move forward with that, and that's how they want their taxpayer dollars to go. And so I'm in favor of that, and think that it would bring a lot of really great resources and also opportunities for folks in our community.
But how could people actually be happy to agree to raise taxes on themselves?
That's something that the voters have to decide.
What ongoing maintenance and operations of the facilities in the city of Charleston are right now in your district?
Yeah, so that's something I'd have to check on. I do know that our park on Johns Island has gotten some improvements, which was really well received by the community. We have pickleball courts. I was actually just over there a couple of weeks ago. I am not a pickleball player, but maybe, I don't have a lot of spare time these days.
Right.
But maybe it's something I'll pick up, but it's something that folks are really excited about. I think any opportunities for us to really give folks an opportunity to have activities on our island is a win-win. Also, one thing that the county is doing has purchased land for the Barrier Island Little League. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that is such a great resource for our community. I'm so in support of that, and I think that's a great example of talking to our county officials and saying, what can we do to really bring these resources and these activities to our communities, and being able to champion those.
What exactly is the communication between the city of Charleston and Charleston County government these days?
So we work on a lot of the Council of Governments and collaborations and relationships there. We do have a new county council person for Johns Island specifically. I've been in communication with him a lot in terms of projects that are ongoing, but also talking to state officials as well. So I do recognize the importance of open lines of communications, and have been really pleased to be able to have a lot of those conversations already during the campaign, to learn about what is going on and to see what are the opportunities to continue to work together. I'm always in favor of doing more in terms of open lines of communication and making sure that everyone is on the same page, and also that we're not reinventing the wheel. But really the goal there for all of us is putting the needs and the desires of constituents and those living in District 3 first.
Let me go back to that park referendum, Ms. Stephanie.
Sure.
I'm just trying to figure out this. Is there a plan to fix and update the city-owned pools without this referendum?
I don't know. I'd have to go back and look and see at all of the things that are included in the referendum. And that's a great point, because, the rec center and aquatic facility are pitched as, kind of one thing that we can do. And there's a whole list. So happy to share those and post those for voters to see. But I don't know that we know the exact estimates of those, just because I think right now they're, kind of in that proposed state and haven't really gone to design.
By doing this referendum, Stephanie, would raising taxes hurt the segment of population who can at least afford it?
It potentially could, and that's why it's being left up to voters. I think that's something that we always have to recognize and be really conscious of, which is why, as I said, I would rarely, if ever, vote to raise taxes. I think it's so important to keep tax dollars in constituents' pockets. Families, we see the inflationary costs. We were talking about the cost of housing. When we go to the grocery store, things are more expensive. Healthcare, it's so important for folks to be able to pay their bills, put food on their table. So I do think that this is good that it's being left up to the taxpayers to decide on. And, it's part of the democratic process of what is decided there.
Stephanie Hodges, candidate for Charleston City Council's District 3 area, Johns Island. Thank you for your time, and welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups again.
Thank you so much, Quintin, for the opportunity.
You're welcome.